I am very pleased by the magic of recording digital technology to have on the Zoom call my friend Scott Wesley Brown. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great, brother. Great to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out. He literally, he and Belinda, I don't want to, I'm kind of actually skipping ahead a little bit, but he and Belinda are getting ready to make a major move across the country. And he is like packing guy, like nonstop, every waking hour, he's putting something in a box, I think.
That
And
is true.
so he's taking a little bit of time out to chat with me today. What occasioned my thinking about doing this? It's kind of long overdue because you've visited before in the comments community and said hello and been very nice about hanging out every once in a while with my little live stream thing. What occasioned this is that Scott and I have a group of brothers that we meet with, and we sort of a play on the Desert Fathers, kind of with a little wink. We call them the Music City Fathers, and that's a bunch of musicians, some California-based, others based in Nashville. So anyway, we got together on Wednesday to have a little bit of music and sending of Scott, and then we adjourned to, you know, the place where the Lord was, El Cholo. We all went for a huge Mexican food lunch. But what happened is that a couple of days, I just got this wacky idea, and I grabbed my phone, and as happens with you probably, Scott, I now compose on devices an awful lot. And I grabbed my iPhone and I just started writing lyrics. And then the next night before we were going to meet, I went to work on the song and finished it. So I sang Scott a song, which I wrote for him as a sending song for him and Belinda from the brothers. So I have that ready to go, and Scott recorded it actually, and I did a little cropping and put lyrics on the bottom. And after we get done with our conversation, I'm going to play that song for you. So here's the thing. I didn't realize until I sort of looked up your bio and just a quick scan. The album count is like up to 25 now?
Yeah, that includes some compilation albums where you pull them off several different albums from the past and condense it all, and that makes it easier to carry them. If you lug every CD you've ever made around in concert, it's pretty crazy. And of course, my stuff goes all the way back to 8 tracks. Can you believe that?
You know, I have my first 2 albums. I've got 8 tracks of my first 2 albums.
Yeah.
Too. Well, you know, to go back even further in our history, before I got to know Scott as a friend and a colleague, I sold his records. I've told this story many times, so I'll make it as short as I can, but both my lifelong friend Dan Ruppel and I worked in a licorice pizza record store out here in Southern California, combination record store head shop. And we both became believers and started carrying Christian music in this secular record store. And we had a better selection of Christian music in our store than even the Bible bookstore down the street. I mean, we ordered everything and we played it all in the store. So, you know, some guy comes in to grab a Leonard Skinner album and some rolling papers, and he got, I'm not religious, I just love the Lord. You know, I mean, so it was really, really cool when we played the music in the stores and sold it and all that. So now, what is your first official album, and when did it come out?
Well, I actually did an album. My dad gave it to me as a gift and paid for the studio time when I turned 21. And that was back in, I think, the summer of 1970 or 71. And it was just called Brown. And then I got a contract a year later with Gary Paxton, who was the Monster Mash guy.
I know, I remember him.
He started a label down in Nashville called New Pax.
That's right.
And I was on that label with several other up and coming artists, and that was probably around 70, maybe 74, 75. I did that, and then left and got a contract with Sparrow Records, um, in 76 and recorded an album for them. And it was interesting because I got signed the same day as Keith Green did. We were at this Big Jesus Festival on the East Coast, and Billy Ray Hearn, who was the president of Sparrow at that time, he asked me to do a performance there at the festival, and if he could kind of review it and see if it worked. And when we met, he said, "Yeah, I just signed this other new artist named Keith Green," and that was the beginning of that whole relationship with Sparrow, where we did 8 albums, for them, and then I moved on to Word Records and a few other labels throughout the years.
Yeah.
But the first one was just a simple little one called Scott Wesley Brown. I think I sold 300 copies of it.
Well, I remember, yeah, I have things where that's the sales picture is after you've hit up every relative and close friend you went to high school with, that's the 300 right there, right? So here's something I didn't know until I looked it up and was reminded. You're on that extremely short list of songwriters who can say, Placido Domingo recorded one of my songs. How did his cover of My Treasure come about?
That was an interesting thing. We had Sparrow had just signed a publishing agreement with Cherry Hill Music. I think it was Cherry Lane Music.
Cherry Lane, yeah.
Milt Oakham and John Denver owned that. And they were going to do an album where they wanted John Denver and Placido Domingo to do an album together to kind of help Placido move into more of the pop market.
Right.
And Denver was huge at the time. And that was the same time they signed this agreement with Sparrow. And so they listened to some of the new albums that were coming out at Sparrow at the time, and they heard my song, My Treasure, and decided that might be a good one for Placido to record. And he did. And it's amazing to hear an opera singer sing one of your songs. But,
yeah, it's definitely a distinctive version.
It is. And so I didn't even know who he was when Billy Ray called me up and said, "Hey, you got it. You're going to get blown away when I tell you what I'm going to tell you." And he said, "Placido Domingo is going to record one of your songs." I went, "Oh, great."
Now, this is a little bit of a deep dive into the detail, but do you remember, was it Milt Oakham that found it, or was it someone else who found the tune?
It was Milt Oakham. He found the tune. I guess he had asked Sparrow, give me a couple of the new albums because they wanted to know what they were agreeing to with the music. And somehow that song landed on his desk and he played it and called Billy Ray, says, "I want to use this one for the album." And I was hoping it would be a duet with Denver, because at the time, John Denver was my superhero musician. But it was just a cut by Placido. I never know how to say his name. Placido, one of those.
Tomato.
But anyway, real. I mean, I was just delighted to have him record it once I learned who he was.
Now, you have probably done more international travel than 10 other artists you could line up put together. I mean, you must have passports in a drawer somewhere that are just completely stamped full.
I've got one, Bob, that I sent it in because I didn't have any more space, and I thought they'd send me a new passport, but instead they stapled or glued a whole new section in like an accordion. It just folded up, so I could take my passport and hold it up in the air, and it would just fling down with 20. But yeah, I've been a number of places, that's for sure.
One of the things that I did not that I wanted to ask you about is, if I have my facts correctly, that you were a driving force and a participant in the first publicly announced Christian concert in Russia.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about how that came about and what part you played.
Well, I had been going into the Soviet Union, as it was known at the time, for a number of years, and from Moscow to Leningrad to Estonia and Latvia. And we had always talked about, wouldn't it be neat to have a big festival, but you couldn't. I mean, in those days, and as soon as the Soviet Union broke up, so to speak, there were a couple of youth guys that really decided that, hey, let's go in there and see if we could do a festival. And they knew that I had been in there, so they contacted me and contacted several other artists. Sheila Walsh was a part of that, Bruce Carroll, and so they organized this festival, and it was amazing because it was so weird because the former KGB agents had to drive us around and had to bring us our lunch and help us clean things up on the stage. I mean, and they weren't happy about it.
Yeah, they were reluctant hosts.
They were very reluctant hosts, but we kept witnessing to them and, praying and hoping that they would come to faith in the Lord. And it was an exciting event. I didn't organize it personally. It was a huge event. I mean, we had several thousand people come, and it lasted for 2 or 3 days. But it was really exciting. And we had it in the Communist Youth Center, and where the students would go. And they had all kinds of events there. But all down the hallways on the tile, they had the hammer and sickle. And so the Christians and the local Christians didn't want to see that. So they got somebody to make copies of the cross. And they taped the cross over top of all the hammers and sickles.
Wow.
So it was a historical event for sure.
That's a trip. Now, I've only had one international experience that might be comparable to that. I went with Fred Field like 25 years ago or more, and we went to what was then Yugoslavia, and I'd never had any international experience like that. And it is a whole different dimension of communication when the language is kind of off the table. I mean, in some places we had translations, and other places we didn't. And I felt like there was a whole other level of communication that I'd kind of taken for granted because the words always drive everything so much.
Right.
And once that's either taken off the table or kind of diminished, it's a different operation. Did most of the places that you go, were there translations involved or something, or did you just go?
No, there were translators for sure, but most of the young people, even in Eastern Europe, Western Europe for sure, but even in Eastern Europe, they understood English.
Yeah.
So wherever we went, because I played in just most of the East Bloc nations, and we had translators, but most of the kids understood English, and I guess you needed it maybe for some of the older folks that were coming who hadn't had the opportunity to study English in school. But those countries knew that the business language of the world was English. So they had English classes in their schools. So they knew it pretty well.
Yeah. I've only done, again, only a fraction of the international travel that you might have done. But the one thing I've noticed is we really are singularly probably the only country in the world where most people are not bilingual or more.
Right.
We just go, well, we're big Americans, we speak English, that's all you need. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, people are growing up in their native languages and then becoming fairly fluent in English or French or Spanish or whatever, and they've got much more of the world at their disposal linguistically.
Well, and they used to have a joke. What do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call somebody who speaks 1 language? American. And that was the joke that was floating around. But I mean, you've got all these countries that are right next to each other. I mean, you could drive 30 minutes from Germany into, Holland or France or some of these other countries. So people are going to know the local languages a lot better. They grow up with that. Where, if we're going to learn any other foreign language, it would only be Spanish, because that's the only country that uses a different language than we do. Canada, maybe a little French, but that's about it.
Now, one thing that I thought was interesting that I found out about you, I generally speaking, when I walk into a room and say, I started playing guitar when I was 10 years old, people go, wow, that's young. You started messing around with guitar at 7?
Messing around, underline that.
Well, but I
That
mean, because of it, first you goof off and then after a while it starts to sound like music. How long did it take until it started to sound like music to you?
Well, I don't know. My dad bought me a guitar when I was 7, and or my parents did, and they gave me lessons. And I remember that the guitar teacher told my dad, "This kid, he's never going to learn how to play the guitar." I just wasn't serious enough about studying, but I really was. I was listening to him. I'd go into these lessons, and he tried to show me something. I said, "Well, why don't you just play it?" And he was playing it, and I was watching his fingers and just listening, and that's how I absorbed it. And then I started making up my own chords and tuning my guitar different so I could play these different songs. And but probably by the time I was in 6th grade, I started getting real serious, and I formed my first rock band called the Surfers.
I saw that. I thought that was great. You know what my first band was called? You're
What?
gonna love this. You can almost get a contact high from how it was. The Dawn of Night.
Oh my gosh, that is cool.
Horrible, yeah?
Long night.
The Dawn of Night. We just
Wow.
thought that was just so cool.
Well, we were the Surfers, and we started out in Northern Virginia, where the ocean
Where all the
is.
great surfing is, right?
Yeah, it's just great going on there in Northern Virginia.
Oh man. Now, eventually, I saw a little note in your bio. You eventually, after being influenced by and sort of idolizing, as we all who own records, the Beach Boys, you eventually hooked up with those guys. How did that happen?
Well, actually, my daughter was had a good friend. I don't want to say she was dating him. He was just, I think he wanted to date her, but he was one of the managers for the Beach Boys. And so we got some comps, and we got to go see him a couple of times while they were here in San Diego, and just got to hang out backstage and talk to them. And I still have one of the set lists that Mike Love, the lead singer, left on the stage. I went out and grabbed it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got all the, like these, Rhonda, instead of "Help Me Rhonda," it just says Rhonda,
Yeah.
or, all these different California, let's see, I wish all the girls would be California girls. They would just kind of put all these different, abbreviated song
Yeah, just
titles.
because it's shorthand. They've been singing these tunes for about 50, 60 years, right?
Song, "Please Don't Send Me to Africa." On my set list, I just write Africa.
Yeah.
And I know it is. So I have that thing of theirs, and I framed it and got Mike Love and a couple of the guys to sign it. It was kind of cool. But anyway.
Well, I've never met him, but I was gifted with some tickets to see Brian Wilson about 4 or 5 years ago.
Um,
And, he was his voice was not that good. And he kind of sat at a keyboard. It was almost like he was hosting a review of his music at the keyboard. So I don't mean to be in any way insensitive or anything like that, because the guy is a genius. And I turned to my sons who were with me and I said, if you've got that kind of music on your resume, you can sit on stage with your keyboard and let everybody else do the heavy lifting all night long. I don't care. And Al Hardin showed up, and his son, I forget his name, but his son sang like all the Brian Wilson parts, and they were awesome.
Yeah.
It was just, the band was, I think Blondie Chaplin might have been there too. And it was just wonderful. You start listening to that chunk of work that Brian Wilson is responsible for, and you just kind of shake your head and go, man, they literally don't build guys like this anymore.
Yeah. And I still, when their music comes on the radio, I just love it. It takes me right back to 6th grade, and going down to the beaches on the East Coast and hearing "Round Round Get Around." I mean, it means so much to me because it's such a connection to my youth. So I wish I could have gotten to know them a little bit more, but it's been a couple years since I've seen them.
Yeah. We'll get off the Beach Boys here in a minute, but we're having some fun. I don't know if you ever heard I think their 50th anniversary album was a new album called "That's Why God Made the Radio." And that record, if you go back and listen to that record, I'm sure that they brought every bit of 21st century studio trickery to bear. I mean, who wouldn't leave tools in the toolbox that you can use, right, to make a great record? But there's no mistaking the fact that those guys, his writing, the way they were singing, you can't, there's no machine that can make that really happen.
Right.
It was pretty stunning how half a century later they could make that kind of record.
Well, and somebody, I don't know where this is, it may be on YouTube, but somebody got their tracks and took all the music out. So all you hear are the vocals, and it's unbelievable. It's just pitch perfect. And it's incredible to hear just the vocals. And so
And this is all back before pitch correction. So they were bringing it.
Yeah. And I mean, it was just the way it went down was the way it went down. You couldn't change it. Where today we can fix it. You can, add stuff in and change it digitally and all that stuff. But in those days you couldn't. And so it was an awesome sound.
Yeah. So have you, I don't have a good answer to this question, and I'm embarrassed that I don't, because people ask me all the time. But if you were to sort of calculate in just round numbers what the gig total might be over the course of your lifetime, or either like average per year, or just like this is how many places I could stick a pin in the map, do you have any earthly idea?
I did once, speaking of sticking a pin in the map, I bought a big atlas of the world, and I bought those little tiny pins with the round red and blue heads and stuff. And I stuck them in the map just to see what it would look like. And there were certain areas of the country I couldn't get any more pins that fit because I'd been there so many times. And then it was exciting to see around the world, how many places I'd been able to minister through music, and 50 countries. And most of those we went to a dozen times, at least a half a dozen times.
Yeah.
So it's I never did count all those pins up.
Now, and you, I would expect, I might be wrong about this, but you, like me, 98, 99% of the time, it's you and a guitar case and a single airline ticket getting out there to go someplace.
Right. Yeah.
There's no road manager, there's no merch manager, there's no I'll get Mr. Brown's hotel room key. None of that stuff is really happening, right?
No, none of that for sure. But I did a couple of times take a keyboard player with me, or a keyboard and a guitar player. I had, and when I was living in Nashville, I had a little band that I could call upon, and I don't mean they weren't a little band; they were some of the best session players in all of Nashville who would go out with me, and especially when you did things like when you sang at Disneyland or Magic Mountain, or they would have these big Jesus.
Yes.
Stuff. I would always bring a band, but for the most part, it was just me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
Gotta credit her, because she was has always been my side man, and or I'm her side man, probably is a better way to say it.
Well, now these days, I want to be careful how I say this, because I don't want to give people the wrong impression. Sometimes you can say something and then you're not retiring, as in I'm not going to do anything more. I'm going to get out on the miniature golf course, and but in terms of like going out for 6, 7, 8, 9 dates at a time and all that stuff, that's kind of in the rearview mirror for now, right?
Yeah, and it has been for a number of years. It's things have slowed down quite a bit, but we're just going to do a handful of things. Moving down to Alabama on the coast there. So going from the West Coast to the South Coast, I guess you could say. And just a few things, and probably smaller things, which I like, more intimate things anyway. So I'm looking forward to it.
That was my point, is that you would still continue to do select dates here and then. You're just not going to be quite the road dog that you've been for the last 40, 50 years.
Exactly.
So now tell us a little bit before we jump off here, and I'll play the song, and tell me a little bit about your current work with the Legacy Coalition and what that's about.
Well, for those who don't know, the Legacy Coalition is a organization that came out of Awana, Larry Fowler, who started it after his kids were growing up and they had kids. He started thinking, what am I going to do? How do I deal with grandkids? And he started looking for resources on grandparenting, Christian grandparenting, but there were very little resource out there for books or anything for him to grab a hold of. So he started trying to get other grandparents interested in forming a movement to try to encourage Christian grandparents and to help them and to write books and to do studies on Christian grandparenting that would enable others to have a better ministry to their grandkids, because a lot of parents were kind of absentee parents when it came to teaching their kids about the Lord and leading them in the faith.
Yeah.
And so book by book started coming out. And of course, you and I and Bruce Carroll and a whole bunch of other folks, we started doing these albums for them to help expose this to a greater audience. And now it's grown into an organization where we're having conferences where several thousand people are coming to these conferences. We're having major speakers come in, experts on ministry and grandparenting. And the whole theme behind this grandparenting movement is intentional Christian grandparenting, because it's like with my kids, my kids have had kids, and when they come over, I normally probably would have thought, well, what you do is you just give them a lot of sugar and have fun with them and then send them home. But and you pray for them on the way out the door. This is intentional. And I mean, like even just this morning, I've been teaching my 11-year-old granddaughter just about the Bible, and talking about the difference between the New Testament, the Old Testament, and where Jesus comes onto the scene, historically, and what that means, and what are the different books of the Bible and different sections of the Bible. And so finding creative ways to help her understand that, rather than just kind of playing around and having fun as a granddad. That's important, but it's also important that it has a spiritual dimension to it, where you really raise up godly kids. Because what a great way to reach this country that desperately needs the Lord. I mean, there are 30 million Christian grandparents in America, and if all of them took seriously discipleship toward their grandchildren, that could make a huge difference. So it's called Legacy Coalition. .com, when you can go there and you can find out all about it.
Well, very good. Well, Scott, I just want to say before we sign off, it's hard for me to be objective about you because you're a dear friend, and I'm just honored to count you as a friend and a brother in that way. But on behalf of so many of us, I just want to thank you for your faithfulness to the task. I mean, only God knows the things that have gone on behind the scenes, things that people will never know, sacrifices you've made, things you've endured, whatever we are the beneficiaries of all of those things when we hear you sing and when we listen to your recordings. And so I just want to thank you and Belinda for just decades of faithfulness, and just thank you.
Well, you're certainly welcome. And likewise, brother, I listened to you and I am so moved and inspired. And gosh, to think that Bob Bennett wrote a song for me, that is incredible. This is the second song you've written for me.
That's right. I have to find the other one.
The other one, it's great. It's fun. But this meant a lot to me. And when I played it for Belinda the other day after our lunch together, tears came to her eyes. So we are both moved, we're humbled, and thank you so much.
Okay, my brother. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Scott Wesley Brown. You can tell by the little chyron that I've probably put up here with our names. For more information about what Scott's doing, has done, and is doing, you can go to where he lives online at scottwesleybrown.com, scottwesleybrown.com. He's got a Facebook page as well. So bless you, brother.
Bless you too. Take care.
Tentative, it's because it is. So
Go ahead.
Faithful brother, faithful friend, this is a goodbye, but it's not the end. So many miles
can never come between who you are to us and what you mean. Faithful servant of our King, the Lord knows and cares about everything, every sacrifice and sorrow you've borne along your way. He'll keep you tomorrow as he's keeping you today. Man of God, oh, the race you've run, we beg your pardon, friend, but you're not done. As long as you have breath, you will sing his praise, so that others may know his wondrous ways. So save a little room in your moving van, pack our prayers and blessings with your dreams and plans. And whenever days are full of conflicts and cares, there are brothers who love you scattered everywhere. How fortunate we are who know you so well. The stories we can share, tall tales we can tell, laughing and crying, singing your songs. No matter where you are, you'll never be gone. No matter where you are, you'll never be gone. Till we all meet again, Godspeed and carry on. This is a goodbye, but it's not the end. Faithful brother, faithful friend. Faithful brother, faithful friend.
Wow.
Nice. Very nice.